trace and pay attention to throughout the year. One of the themes is the inclusion of Gentiles, or all the nations, in the proclamation of the gospel. Matthew and Mark kind of focus on Jesus bringing the good news to the Jews, and Luke says, yeah, but Jesus brings the good news to all people as well. So we get that theme repeated over and over again in Luke's gospel. The good news being proclaimed to the Gentiles or to the nations. Another theme is that Luke raises the prominence of women in ministry. We get a lot more engagement and a lot more stories about the women that surrounded Jesus and supported the ministry that he was undertaking in the world. So a more prominent role for women in ministry. We see that continued in Acts especially. Luke, Acts is kind of like the same author that wrote the Gospel of Luke, wrote the Acts of the Apostles. And we see the role of women increasing more and more in the ministry of the church through the book of Acts. And then the third theme that we can kind of trace and follow along is the theme of economic justice. Luke is really concerned about how Jesus' ministry is impactful of the poor, and how he challenges the rich and the wealthy to enter into a different way of being and interacting with their wealth for the good of all people. But Jesus is especially concerned in the Gospel with the poor and seeking justice, economic justice for the poor. So it looks like they're getting it done in there. So that's an important thing to kind of say at the beginning of this year as we begin to look at the Gospel of Luke and make our way through the Gospel throughout this year. From now until the end of November next year, we'll be using the Gospel of Luke. So if you can remember those three things, I'll remind you from time to time, but remember those three themes, and it will help you kind of track the gospel and your engagement with the Gospel of Luke. The fact that we're including everyone in Jesus' ministry, it's an inclusive, expansive ministry of Jesus. The fact that women play a much more prominent role in the stories of the gospel, and the sort of seeking of economic justice and the engagement of rich and poor in the ministry of the gospel. Remember those three themes. Here it comes. Yay. That was fast. I think it will just fit right on here, won't it? Let's hope so. Let's just put it right there. Lift it up. Wait, I'm gonna do that. Yeah. Now, see, they missed that part, so you have to fill them in on the themes of the Gospel of Luke, right? Yeah. This year, or during the season of Advent, we contemplate Jesus' coming as the Christ, as the Son of God, born of Mary. When we talk about Advent, the word Advent means coming. Jesus is second coming, when time will end, and when justice will be accomplished fully, and when God's reign will be irresistible. So we're looking for Jesus coming into the world as the baby born in Bethlehem to Mary, the first coming of Christ. And we're looking for the second coming, when Christ will come in majesty and power and defeat once and for all the powers of this world and bring about the reign of God. Those are two quite contrasting advents that we kind of hold together in tension during this time of watching and waiting and preparing. So how do you prepare for a baby?
Baby shower.
Baby shower, okay, that's good. Get the room ready. Yeah, you clear the room, or you put new furniture there, you paint the walls, all that sort of thing. I know friends of mine basically got rid of everything in their house that was at all hazardous or dangerous. They baby-proofed, right? You have a little bit of time, I think, to do that, right? Because they're not going to be mobile yet. But as soon as they're mobile, my goodness, you better be on top of things. What else do you do to prepare for a baby?
Read a book.
Think of names? Yeah, that's good. Read a book? Yeah, you wish. Get lots of rest. Yeah, so there's ways that we prepare for a new child, an infant. And maybe we could contemplate how in our lives we could make some preparations to welcome the Christ child into our lives anew, again, on Christmas Eve. What that might look like for us if we were told, which we are being told, there's a child coming, and you need to be ready to receive this child. So what do you need to do to be ready for that gift? And then what do you do when you're told that the end is near? What are you going to do, when someone says to you, your time is up?
Prepare.
How do you prepare?
Get your affairs in order.
Get your affairs in order. Make sure that your will is notarized or whatever. You might seek out some broken relationships and try to repair those broken relationships before it's too late.
Tell your stories.
You tell your stories. Say more about that. What do you mean by?
Life review is
Yeah.
what happens when you know your end is near, and it's very healing for the person who's about to leave to be able to share their life stories.
Yeah. You see that often when people are nearing the end. They rehearse their accomplishments and their failures, maybe. They confess the things that they wish they hadn't done, and they try to make amends for the wrongs and the hurts that they may have caused. Yeah. So all kinds of ways that we could, if we were told time is up, that we would prepare ourselves for that. So there's two very different advents that we're looking at, and two very different ways of preparing ourselves. Some homework for you. Maybe think about what you could be doing in this season of watching and waiting and how do you prepare for those things? Saint, oh gosh, thinking just a, anyway, some old saint. He'll come to me in a minute. He had this theory that there are three advents. There's the advent of the child, and there's the advent of the Son of Man. But there's an advent in between. Every day, there's an advent, a coming of Christ to us in the knock at the door, in the opportunity to welcome a stranger, in the relationship that is healed, in the gift of a meal or a donation. He saw this middle advent as something that spans the distance between the first advent and the last advent. And we have opportunities every moment of every day to experience Christ coming into our hearts, into our lives, into our world. And one of the things that I think we need to do, and I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, is we need to hold up and broadcast and tell the stories of the most vulnerable people in our society and in our world. Especially in the face of oppression. Especially in the face of injustice. We need to, I'm going to use this as a sort of analogy, light a candle in the darkness. That's sort of how I understand this telling the story of the vulnerable or the needy. We're lighting a candle in the darkness. We're showing the Christ light in the most desperate situations of the world. We're proclaiming our faith that the darkness doesn't win. The darkness doesn't have the last word. The darkness ultimately is cast away. And Christ's light shines in the world more and more and more brilliantly each day that we welcome those advents in our lives. So you have some work to do. You have some contemplation, some things to think about. And I hope that you'll find opportunities to light a candle in your world. Figuratively, literally, however you go about that. Where you can show